Humans don't win fights. We just don't lose. The war room aboard the Zarnith command vessel was a stark contrast to the chaos threatening the galaxy. The polished obsidian walls hummed with the soft pulse of power, their reflective surface casting sharp, angular shadows across the room. Holographic projections of distant stars floated serenely above the central table, their serene glow an eerie juxtaposition to the tension filling the room. It was a cold, clinical space, but one that reeked of quiet anxiety. Each flickering light in the projection mirrored the nervous energy that buzzed in the air. Around the table, Zarnith officials and their allies fidgeted nervously, glancing at each other, their voices hushed and uncertain. The war wasn't just on the horizon anymore, it was practically at their doorstep. Ambassador Kale towered above the assembly, his imposing form casting a long shadow over the gathered representatives. His golden scales shimmered in the artificial light, and his reptilian pupils darted between the glowing battle projections, narrowing with frustration. The sharp edge of his voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "The Krath Empire has destroyed 3 sectors in the last cycle alone," Kale growled, his voice resonating with raw anger. "They're advancing with impunity, and yet here we are, scrambling for answers." A subordinate, a slight Zarnith officer with a pale silver sheen to his scales, hesitated before speaking. "Ambassador, we've analyzed their battle tactics, but they've grown increasingly erratic. They've adapted. Their strategies are unpredictable now." Kale's gaze hardened, his claws flexing against the table. "The Krath do not adapt," he snapped. "They overwhelm. Their chaos is deliberate, not reactive. We must counter them with superior order." The room fell silent as Kale's fiery gaze swept across the gathered species. The projection of the Krath fleet flickered ominously on the screen, and the tension in the room thickened. Kale's eyes lingered on the lone human in the corner of the room, Lieutenant Commander Erin Chase. Her figure, though smaller than most of the Zarnith, exuded an easy confidence that contrasted sharply with the cold, calculated nature of the Zarnith representatives. She leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, her face a mask of unreadable calm. Kale's voice dripped with disdain. And yet these humans, with their outdated technology and rudimentary strategies, have somehow resisted the Krath for 3 cycles. Commander Chase, perhaps you'd like to enlighten us? Erin, unfazed by Kale's pointed words, shrugged lazily and pushed herself off the wall. She stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the floor as she moved toward the holographic map. The hum of the room seemed to dull as she did, the others falling into silence, waiting for her response. "It's not magic, Ambassador," Erin began, her tone casual but sharp with purpose. "We don't win fights." A murmur rippled through the room, the collective confusion palpable. Kale's head tilted sharply, his slit pupils narrowing with a mix of disbelief and disdain. "Excuse me?" Erin didn't flinch, her smirk a fraction wider. "We don't win fights. What we're good at is not losing them. There's a difference." The murmurs grew louder, ripples of confusion turning to irritation as her words sunk in. Kale's tail lashed against the floor in a swift motion, a sign of his waning patience. His sharp eyes bored into her. "Explain," he demanded, his voice low but commanding. Erin stepped up to the holographic map, her easy demeanor shifting to one of focus. She lightly tapped the table, zooming in on the Krath formation. Her fingers danced across the display, highlighting the dense clusters of warships surrounding a vulnerable center. "The Krath are relentless, sure, but they're predictable," Erin continued, her voice steady. "They rely on brute force and perfect coordination to overwhelm their enemies. They expect you to fight on their terms, head to head, fleet to fleet." She paused, her eyes flicking to Kale's as her fingers traced along the map. "Humans don't play that game. We scatter, we distract, we hit where it hurts and we keep moving. By the time the Krath realize what's happening, we've already adapted." Kale's claws flexed against the table, his muscles tense with barely contained anger. "And you call this strategy? Chaos and retreat?" "No," Erin said, her tone hardening. Her eyes met his with unwavering resolve. "I call it survival. Humans have a knack for turning losing battles into victories because we refuse to be beaten. We don't play fair, we play smart." The room was thick with silence, the others exchanging looks of skepticism, confusion, and even doubt. The holographic map of the Krath fleet flickered with ominous red blips, showing a slow advance toward the Zarnith defensive perimeter. The tension hung heavy, but Erin remained focused. She wasn't just trying to convince them of a new strategy, she was declaring the human way of doing things. Kale studied her, his golden eyes sharp with thought, but there was something else there now, a flicker of uncertainty. Perhaps it was respect, or perhaps a grudging acceptance of her audacity. The truth remained that her words had rattled something deep within him, something he wasn't sure he wanted to acknowledge just yet. Finally, Kale spoke, his voice quieter but still laced with challenge. "So you think this survival tactic will defeat the Krath?" Erin tilted her head, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I don't think it will. I know it will." Kale stared at Erin, his golden eyes narrowing slightly as he processed her words. The room had fallen unnervingly silent, the air heavy with the weight of his scrutiny. His jaw tightened, his expression unreadable. The only sounds were the soft hum of the holograms and the steady pulse of distant alarms. Erin didn't flinch under his gaze. Instead, she stood tall, her posture unwavering, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She knew the game they were playing now. It was more than just strategy, it was philosophy. Finally, Kale leaned forward, his golden scales glinting in the sterile light. "Commander Chase," he said, his voice low, carrying an edge of disbelief. "You expect me to believe that your species thrives on unpredictability and persistence alone? That's not strategy, it's desperation." Erin's smirk widened and she met his piercing gaze head-on, her stance casual but her tone firm. "Desperation is a hell of a motivator, Ambassador. You'd be surprised what you can accomplish when your back's against the wall." The tension in the room thickened, the Zarnith officials exchanging uncertain glances. Erin's words echoed in the sterile command center, a testament to the kind of relentless determination that humanity had become known for. Kale didn't respond immediately, his tail twitching in irritation. His sharp gaze never left Erin, as if he were trying to peer into the heart of her convictions. Before he could speak, a sharp chime interrupted the silence. A Zarnith officer, one of the senior staff, stepped into the war room, his expression grim. His voice crackled through the tense atmosphere. "Ambassador Kale," the officer said, "the Krath fleet has been detected in this sector. They'll breach the outer defenses within the hour." The room erupted into motion. Officers scrambled to relay commands, their voices rising as they analyzed the incoming threat. Tactical analysts worked feverishly at their consoles, adjusting the fleet's formation and strategizing countermeasures. Kale's sharp eyes flickered to the officer before narrowing once again on Erin. The earlier frustration in his gaze softened, replaced by something more complex, reluctant respect. He knew the stakes had just escalated, and Erin's seemingly reckless approach to war had now become something that would either make or break them. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "It seems your philosophy of not losing is about to be tested, Commander." Erin didn't flinch, her smile a quiet challenge. "Don't worry, Ambassador. Humans are experts at surviving impossible odds." Her words carried the weight of experience, like a battle-tested truth that no one could deny. She spoke with such assurance that even the Zarnith officials couldn't help but take notice. Kale's eyes hardened once more, but now there was a flicker of something else there, curiosity. The silence stretched between them, and it was clear he was weighing the full implications of Erin's words. Finally, after a long moment, Kale's voice cut through the tension, his tone cautious but tinged with reluctant respect. "It seems we'll see this not losing strategy in action. Are you prepared, Commander?" Erin's smirk remained, but it was no longer just confidence. There was a quiet certainty in her expression, the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down the impossible time and time again. "Always." The room fell silent again, the anticipation evident. As Kale stared at Erin, something shifted in his mind. Perhaps this human, this woman, understood something he had overlooked in his pursuit of order. She had no grand strategies, no elaborate plans, but her resolve was something else entirely. The Krath were about to descend on them in full force. The question wasn't if they would succeed, it was how long they could hold on. Erin's eyes flickered toward the holographic map, her body tense and alert as the Zarnith officers prepared for battle. The battle was coming, and for better or worse, Erin was ready to face it no matter what. She wasn't looking for glory, she was looking for survival. The command room aboard the Zarnith vessel had descended into a frenzy. Officers scrambled between consoles, communicating with various fleet commanders, feeding data into holographic interfaces that flickered and hummed above the central table. The map was alive with moving blips, each representing a Krath ship closing in on their forces. The room buzzed with urgency, but amidst the chaos, one person remained eerily calm. Erin Chase leaned against the console, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the holographic map, her expression unreadable. The human commander's unwavering calmness was beginning to unnerve Kale. She seemed unaffected by the imminent threat bearing down on them. To Kale, her ability to remain cool under pressure bordered on maddening. "How can she stand there unfazed?" Kale muttered to himself, his claws tapping impatiently against the surface of the table. "Isn't she worried about our inevitable defeat?" His thoughts were interrupted as Erin casually pushed off the console and strolled over to the central table, where the holographic projection of the Krath fleet filled the air. Despite the grave situation, she exuded a quiet confidence, her posture relaxed as though this were just another day at the office. "Commander Chase," Kale called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "If you have any insights worth sharing, now would be the time." Erin glanced at him over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she studied the display. "All right, listen up," she began, her voice steady with that same confident calm. "First thing you need to understand about humans is this. We don't fight to win. We fight to keep fighting." Kale's brow furrowed. "That sounds counterintuitive." Erin grinned and started pacing around the table, her finger tracing the Krath formation. "It's not," she said, her gaze sharp as she analyzed the situation. "The Krath are all about control, right? Perfect formations, flawless timing, overwhelming force. But they're rigid. They rely on everything going according to plan. Humans, we don't rely on plans. We rely on adaptability." She zoomed in on the Krath fleet, highlighting the dense clusters of warships surrounded by supply vessels. "See these?" She pointed at the supply ships, their vital presence looming near the heart of the Krath formation. The Krath always protect their supply ships, but they keep them close to the main fleet. Why? Because they assume no one's dumb enough to attack them head-on. Kale's expression darkened as he processed the information, his tail flicking nervously behind him. "And you propose we do exactly that?" Erin's lips curled into a small, confident smile. "Not directly, no. We're going to hit them where it hurts and make them think we're coming for the kill. They'll panic, pull resources to defend, and that's when we start peeling them apart." She turned to Kale, eyes gleaming with the excitement of her plan coming to life. "The Krath rely too heavily on their expectations. When you expect everything to go right, a little bit of chaos goes a long way. That's where we come in." Kale crossed his arms, his reptilian pupils narrowing in suspicion. "And you believe this chaos will succeed where precision tactics have failed?" Erin leaned in, her fingers brushing the edges of the holographic map as she spoke. Chaos isn't just about throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks. It's about creating opportunities. We're not trying to destroy the Krath outright. We're trying to make them overreach, overcommit, and collapse under their own weight. Kale's claws flexed at his side. He wasn't convinced, but there was something compelling about her words. Humans were known for their unpredictability, but could this unpredictable strategy really succeed where all other tactics had failed? And how do you plan to keep control of this chaos you're advocating? Kale asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. By letting the Krath think they're in control, Erin said with a knowing smile. Let them believe they're winning, and then we hit them where it hurts. The moment they think they've cornered us, we'll make them regret ever underestimating humanity. Kale studied her, his golden eyes unreadable. This was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. So your strategy isn't just to outsmart them, it's to get them to do the work for us by making them overextend their reach. Exactly, Erin said. She leaned back, crossing her arms and looking at Kale with an almost defiant confidence. If they can't anticipate our next move, they'll waste resources chasing phantoms. While they're distracted, we'll hit their weak points. Kale's second-in-command, an older Zarnith with silver scales, stepped forward with a skeptical look in his dark eyes. He was tall even by Zarnith standards, and his voice carried the weight of years of experience. And what happens when they adapt to your so-called chaos, Commander? Surely even humans have limits. Erin tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a confident grin. That's the thing about humans. We're great at finding ways to survive. If the Krath adapt, we adapt faster. She took a step forward, her tone growing firmer. It's not about limits. It's about refusing to let them break us. It's about bending, not snapping. Kale watched her, his golden eyes narrowing as he processed her words. He leaned forward slightly, intrigued yet still skeptical. You speak as though humans are unique in their resilience. Do you truly believe no other species has endured hardship? Erin's smirk remained, but her gaze was unwavering, steady. Oh, I'm sure plenty of species have faced hardship and endured it. But humans? She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We're not just resilient, we're stubborn. We don't just bend, we fight. When you throw us into the worst situations, when you stack the odds so high they seem insurmountable, we don't give up. We claw our way out no matter how ugly or messy it gets, and when we do, we make sure it's worth it. Kale's claws drummed against the table, the rhythmic tapping almost matching the building tension in the room. His tail flicked irritably behind him, a sign that his patience was running thin. Your philosophy sounds like reckless improvisation. Erin's expression didn't falter. She shrugged, unfazed by his critique. Call it what you want. You're right. There's a certain art to improvisation, the ability to read a situation, adjust to it, and make the most of it. She leaned in a little closer, her voice lowering, almost daring him. It's not a lack of preparation. It's a strategy born from necessity. When the plan falls apart, and it always does, you learn to roll with the punches. And in doing so, you find a way to win. The Zarnith officer's eyes widened slightly as Erin spoke, his tail flicking with renewed interest. He had been around long enough to understand that humans had a way of making the impossible seem inevitable. But still, he wasn't sure whether this chaos philosophy would work against the Krath, whose sheer size and power had obliterated entire sectors. Kale's gaze softened ever so slightly, but the skepticism didn't leave his voice. You make it sound like you've mastered the art of failure, Commander. Is that what you're saying? Erin didn't flinch. No. What I'm saying is that we've mastered the art of survival. It's not about being perfect. It's about being persistent. She paused, letting that truth hang in the air. I didn't say this would be easy, Ambassador. I said it would work. Kale stared at her for a long moment, measuring her words. She wasn't like the other humans he had encountered, weak, predictable, and bound by rules they couldn't break. This one, though, there was something in her eyes, something that made him wonder if she had more to teach his people than just tactics. With a deep, almost reluctant sigh, Kale nodded. Fine, you've made your point. Let's see if this persistence of yours holds up under pressure. Erin's grin widened, but there was no trace of arrogance. Just a quiet confidence that radiated from her like a force in itself. Trust me, Ambassador, you'll see exactly what humans are capable of when everything else falls apart. Erin's fingers danced over the holographic console, her eyes narrowing as she manipulated the projection, zooming in on the Krath fleet's rear flank. She flicked a few switches and the display shifted, outlining the Krath's vulnerable positions. "Here's how we do it," she said, her voice calm but full of purpose. She tapped the holographic map, highlighting a dense cluster of Krath ships. "First, we deploy decoys, drones that mimic our ship's signals. We'll scatter them across this sector, flooding their sensors with false readings." Kale's frown deepened as he studied the display, clearly unimpressed. "You intend to confuse them?" He crossed his arms over his chest, his golden scales catching the light as he shifted his weight. "Exactly," Erin replied, her tone unwavering. "The Krath rely on perfect coordination, right? Their ships move in lockstep, their attacks are synchronized, and they assume their enemies will do the same. But that's their fatal flaw. If we disrupt that, they'll start making mistakes. They'll panic, and once they're off balance, we strike. We hit their supply ships with a fast strike team. No supplies, no fleet." Kale's second-in-command, a tall Zarnith officer with silver scales and sharp, calculating eyes, spoke up. His voice was filled with skepticism. "And how do you propose we avoid their main force? You're talking about deploying decoys across a sector the size of this entire quadrant. Won't they just isolate us? Cut us off before we can even make a move?" Erin flashed him a grin, leaning in toward the table, her eyes gleaming with confidence. "We don't avoid them." She straightened up, her smirk widening as she glanced between Kale and the officer. "We bait them into chasing us. Humans are great at running just fast enough to stay ahead while leading you into a trap." There was a brief silence in the room as the Zarnith officials processed the strategy. Erin's bold approach wasn't conventional by any means. It was risky, chaotic, and, if it worked, potentially brilliant. But chaos was a tool the Krath had yet to master, and it was exactly the tool Erin had honed in countless battles. Kale studied the hologram, his golden eyes focused intently on the fleet's formation. His clawed hands were clenched against the table, but there was a trace of curiosity in his gaze now. "You want to bait them into chasing us? And you think we can handle them with a few decoys?" "Not just decoys," Erin said, her tone cool and confident. "The decoys will make the Krath think we're throwing everything at them. But the real trick is getting them to focus on the wrong targets. We'll make them believe they're winning, and that's when we hit them where it counts. They won't know what hit them." Her eyes flicked to the holographic map as she zoomed out, showing the decoys' potential path and how they would pull the Krath's attention away from the actual battle. She turned back to Kale, her expression still composed, but there was a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Think of it like a game of chess," she continued, "but instead of the knight, we're the rook. We don't just move, we take control. We make the Krath play our game." Kale's tail flicked behind him, betraying his curiosity as he mulled over her plan. "It's unconventional," he admitted after a long pause. His voice was tinged with reluctant respect. "But it's not without merit. The Krath are used to fighting straightforward battles. They won't know how to respond when things go sideways." Erin gave a sharp nod, glad to see that Kale was finally starting to see the potential in her strategy. She clapped her hands together, the sound echoing through the tense war room. "Glad you're on board. Now let's get to work. The Krath aren't going to confuse themselves, but we sure as hell can." She turned to the Zarnith officers, her expression now one of no-nonsense efficiency. Get the drones ready. I want them deployed in 5 minutes. Our window is short. If we don't act fast, they'll re-establish control." As the officers moved quickly to carry out her orders, Kale stayed by her side, a new level of respect in his gaze. Erin could feel it, a shift in the air between them. This wasn't just about tactics anymore. It was about understanding. She could almost hear the gears turning in Kale's mind. He wasn't ready to admit it fully, but he was starting to believe that her chaotic methods might just work. The Zarnith fleet hovered at the edge of the Krath-occupied sector, their sleek ships in tight formation. The tension on the bridge of the command vessel was palpable. Every officer braced for the inevitable clash. At the center of it all stood Erin Chase, arms crossed and a mischievous glint in her eye as she watched the final preparations unfold. "Drones are deployed," an officer announced, his scaled hands flying over the console. "Krath sensors should be picking them up, now." Erin leaned over the holographic map, watching as dozens of blinking decoy signals appeared on the display. The false readings mimicked Terran and Zarnith ships scattered across the sector in a chaotic pattern. "Perfect," Erin said. "Let's see how much they like playing whack-a-mole." "Drones are active," a Zarnith officer reported, his claws tapping nervously against the console. "Krath sensors are registering multiple contacts." Kale's sharp gaze darted between the display and Erin, who leaned casually against the table, chewing a stick of gum she'd procured from her jacket. Her nonchalance grated on his nerves. This was war, not a Terran street brawl. "They're reacting," the officer continued, his voice rising with tension. "Krath ships are splitting into smaller groups to intercept." "Perfect," Erin said, blowing a small bubble before popping it with a loud snap. "Let the fun begin." Kale bristled. "This is hardly a time for levity, Commander." Erin shrugged, her smirk unapologetic. "You'd be surprised how much levity helps when you're staring death in the face. Besides, this is just the first act. Wait until they really start scrambling." On the other side of the battlefield, the Krath fleet surged forward. Their ships moved with mechanical precision, splitting into smaller groups to chase the scattered decoy signals. The once intimidating formation began to unravel, spreading itself thin. Kale watched the display, his golden eyes narrowing. "They're reacting faster than I expected." "They always do at first," Erin said, her tone calm. "But give it a minute. The more they split up, the harder it'll be for them to regroup. That's when we strike." As if on cue, a Zarnith officer spoke up. "The Krath have engaged 3 of the decoys. Their rear supply line is exposed." Erin smirked. "There it is. All right, strike teams, you're up. Hit those supply ships hard and fast. Don't stick around for the fireworks." In the void of space, a squadron of Terran and Zarnith ships peeled away from the main fleet, heading straight for the Krath's exposed supply vessels. The smaller, nimbler ships weaved through the chaos, dodging stray fire from the disoriented Krath forces. Inside the lead Terran fighter, Lieutenant Diaz gripped the controls, his voice crackling over the comms. "All teams, focus fire on their fuel carriers. Let's light up the night." A barrage of laser fire erupted, slamming into the Krath supply ships. Explosions rippled through their lines as fuel reserves ignited, creating a chain reaction that sent debris scattering in every direction. In the void of space, the strike team squadrons powered up their engines. The combined Terran and Zarnith ships were a motley assortment. Terran vessels sleek and practical, Zarnith craft angular and bristling with weaponry. Each pilot wore a look of grim determination as they prepared for the dangerous mission ahead. Lieutenant Diaz, the Terran squadron leader, clicked on his comms. "All right, team. You know the drill. Fast, precise, and don't stick around for tea." "Tea?" a Zarnith pilot asked, his voice dripping with confusion. "Human thing," Diaz said. "Just follow my lead." The squadron darted toward the Krath supply ships, weaving through debris and stray laser fire. As they closed in, Diaz's voice crackled over the comms. Target the fuel tanks. We want fireworks, people. The first volley of missiles struck true, igniting a series of explosions that sent shockwaves rippling through space. Supply ships shattered, their debris cascading into nearby Krath vessels. The Zarnith war room erupted into cheers as the holographic map lit up with the destruction of the Krath supply ships. Kale allowed himself a rare smile, but Erin remained focused, her eyes scanning the display. "Don't celebrate just yet," she warned. "They're about to get desperate." As if on cue, the remaining Krath ships began to regroup, abandoning their pursuit of the decoys. Their movements were erratic, their tight coordination shattered, but they were still dangerous. "They're coming for us," Kale muttered, his claws flexing. "Good," Erin said, her smirk returning. "Now we lead them into the trap." Kale watched the destruction unfold with a mix of awe and disbelief. "They're retreating," he murmured, his voice tinged with astonishment. "The Krath are retreating." "Not quite," Erin said, her tone cautious. She gestured to the holographic map where the remaining Krath ships were regrouping. "They're pissed, and pissed Krath are dangerous." The Krath fleet, battered but not broken, began converging on the Allied forces. Their movements were frantic, their cohesion shattered, but their firepower remained formidable. Erin leaned over the table, her eyes scanning the display with laser focus. "This is it. They're coming straight for us. Time to lead them into the asteroid field." Kale's tail lashed behind him. "You intend to fight them in there? That's suicide." "Only if you're dumb enough to stand still," Erin shot back. "The asteroids are our cover. We keep moving, keep them chasing us, and let them smash themselves to pieces." Kale hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. "Do it." The Zarnith fleet shifted into a loose formation, deliberately appearing disorganized as they retreated toward the nearby asteroid field. The massive ships creaked under the strain of their own weight, a stark contrast to the nimble Terran and Zarnith fighters darting through space. The Krath followed in hot pursuit, their larger ships struggling to keep pace in the dense cluster of rocks that filled the void. Erin stood at the helm of the war room aboard the Zarnith command vessel, her fingers poised over the console as she watched the battle unfold. Her eyes locked onto the holographic map, zooming in on the Krath fleet that was now dangerously close to the asteroid field. The tension in the room was unmistakable. This was their moment. "Now!" she barked, her voice steady as she issued the command. "Hit them from all sides. Use the asteroids for cover and keep them off balance. They're not used to this kind of warfare." The combined Terran and Zarnith forces launched their counterattack, a flurry of movement as the fleet shifted, launching coordinated strikes from unexpected angles. The Krath ships, large and cumbersome, faltered under the sudden assault. Their firepower, previously precise and deadly, scattered uselessly as they failed to hit their agile targets, the shots ricocheting off massive asteroids or evaporating into empty space. Kale stood rigidly beside Erin, his golden eyes wide with disbelief as he watched the Krath formation crumble on the holographic map. This is chaos." Erin's lips curled into a grin. "This is human ingenuity," she corrected him, her voice filled with pride. "You create enough problems for the enemy, and eventually they collapse under their own weight." The Allied fleet maneuvered deeper into the asteroid field, their ships darting between massive rocks that tumbled through space, using them as cover while maintaining their unpredictable movements. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, one that the Krath were slowly losing. On the battlefield, the Krath followed, their larger vessels struggling to navigate the dense cluster of debris. They were used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force, not with this relentless, erratic barrage of movements. Their ships fired wildly, their shots missing entirely or slamming into asteroids, sending debris scattering through space. Erin watched with a sense of satisfaction as the Krath began to break apart. She glanced at the officer beside her. "Status report," she barked, her tone commanding. The officer, a young Zarnith with quick hands, worked rapidly at the console. "Strike teams are in position, Commander," he replied. "We've initiated the attack. The Krath ships are starting to scatter, but their larger vessels are having trouble keeping up with the smaller craft." Erin nodded, her fingers dancing over the console as she pulled up real-time footage from the front lines. Through the heads-up display, she saw the Terran and Zarnith fighters weaving expertly through the asteroid field. The agile ships took advantage of the larger rocks, using them as shields from Krath fire, while the Krath ships, slow and cumbersome, fired blindly, missing their mark. "Good," Erin muttered to herself, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. "Keep them off balance." The Zarnith fleet, too, was engaged in the fight, their ships moving with surprising agility despite their size. Smaller, more nimble than the Krath, the Zarnith ships darted between asteroids, striking quickly and retreating into the safety of the rocks. Kale, watching the chaos unfold from the side, couldn't help but feel a surge of pride in the Zarnith fighters. But his eyes still lingered on Erin, his mind processing the unconventional tactics that had brought them to this point. As the battle raged on, Erin's attention snapped back to the hologram. A massive Krath destroyer, its engines straining to keep pace with the smaller fighters, collided with a massive asteroid. The impact was catastrophic, the explosion lighting up the void in a brilliant flash. Debris scattered in every direction, the shockwave rippling across the battlefield. The Krath ship was no more. Erin didn't flinch at the sight. She knew this was part of the plan. The Krath would be forced to waste their resources on erratic movements, losing their cohesion as the battle progressed. Kale stood beside her, his eyes wide in awe at the destruction. This is madness." Erin didn't even look at him. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the holographic map, a smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "This is humanity, Ambassador. Beautiful, glorious madness." She turned to the officer beside her. "Keep pushing. The Krath won't regroup as fast as they think. Let's finish what we started." The Zarnith command vessel shuddered as another wave of Krath fire rang out, but Erin was undeterred. Her strategy was simple. Keep the Krath disoriented, keep them guessing, and eventually they would break under their own momentum. "They're still chasing," Kale muttered, watching the Krath fleet splintering apart. "That's what we want," Erin said, her voice filled with determination. "The more they chase, the more they'll lose control. Let them think they're winning until it's too late." As the Allied fleet continued to press their advantage, the Krath fleet, battered and stretched thin, was forced to retreat into the chaos of the asteroid field. Every time they tried to regroup, another Terran or Zarnith ship would emerge from the debris, striking where they least expected it. Kale turned to Erin with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "I can't say I understand your methods, but they're working." Erin shot him a sideways glance, her grin widening. "You don't have to understand, Kale. You just have to watch." The last of the Krath ships vanished into hyperspace, retreating from the battlefield. The Zarnith command room erupted into cheers, but Erin remained focused, her eyes still glued to the holographic map. Kale turned to Erin, his expression unreadable. "I'll admit, Commander, I doubted you. But your tactics have proven effective." "Glad to hear it," Erin said, brushing soot off her jacket. "Now you see why humans are so good at not losing." Kale extended a clawed hand. "Perhaps there's more we can learn from your kind." Erin took his hand with a smirk. "Lesson 1, never underestimate the underdog." Kale raised an eyebrow, but before he could speak, Erin added, "Lesson 2, never underestimate the power of not losing." Hours later, the Krath fleet was in full retreat. The Allied forces had sustained losses, but their victory was undeniable. The war room erupted in cheers as the remaining Krath ships vanished into hyperspace. Kale approached Erin, his expression unreadable. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. I underestimated you. And your people. Erin chuckled. You're not the first, probably won't be the last. I'd like to learn more about this philosophy of yours. Perhaps there's something the Zarnith can learn from humans after all. You'll get there, Ambassador. Just never forget the value of persistence. Cheers erupted on the Zarnith command ship as the Allied forces celebrated their victory. Kale turned to Erin, his expression a mix of admiration and disbelief. You've proven your point, Commander, he said. Your chaos has defeated the Krath. Erin smiled, exhaustion etched into her features. It's not about chaos, Kale. It's about survival. Humans don't win because we're stronger or smarter. We win because we refuse to give up. Kale extended a clawed hand again, a rare gesture of respect. Then perhaps the Zarnith have more to learn from humanity than I realized. Erin shook his hand, her grin widening. Lesson 3, when in doubt, improvise.